Hello, Beat Check listeners. I'm Shane Dixon Kavanaugh, reporter for the Oregonian Oregon Live, and your host today. Portland City Hall is on the verge of some truly monumental changes, ranging from the radical transformation of how the city's government operates to an historic election this November that will usher in a new mayor and expanded city council. The work to get here has been years in the making now, and few have followed all the twists and turns of this civic saga as closely as my guest, Maja Harris. A longtime journalist and local government watcher, Maja is the founder of Rose City Reform, a nonprofit, nonpartisan news site that's become a must-read for reporters, political insiders, and many of the people seeking local elected office this fall. Maja, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. Delighted to be here.
I'm delighted too. I'm not going to lie. And I kind of just rattled off sort of a short summary of Rose City Reform and the work that you do. But I wanted to start by asking, how would you describe the project that you've embarked upon it and have been doing with great consistency and regularity for the last couple of years?
Yeah, so Rose City Reform is a nonprofit, nonpartisan research initiative. And really what we do is we track the reforms that were passed in 2022. And we also track the record-breaking candidate pool that was a result of those reforms.
And if you could, start by telling our listeners a little bit about why you decided to launch this project when you did.
Yeah, so going back to 2022, Rose City Reform actually started as a sort of spur of the moment overnight decision to launch a newsletter that would explain the reform process that was underway. There was the charter review process that eventually led to all of these reforms being put on the ballot. So that was sort of the impetus for the project. But since then, it has grown into a full-on research project. We now have 4 people working on this project, and we really exist for 2 reasons. One is just the historic nature of these reforms. You know, it's not every day that you get to completely overhaul your city government and vacate all seats and completely elect a new city government. It's really unprecedented in the lifetime of any Portlander alive today. And the other reason we exist is, you know, this is arguably the most important city election, you know, that we'll probably ever experience. But it's also going to be one of the most complex, like maybe the most complex that we'll experience because of the record-breaking candidate pool. And that has, you know, we can get into the reasons for that, but one of the main reasons is just there are so many seats open. There are 14 seats open right now. And we've also, as part of these reforms, we have eliminated primary elections, and we have a new voting method, ranked choice voting, which means that you're going to see all of these candidates on the ballot. And, you know, in some districts, like in District 3 right now, we have 30 candidates. Mm-hmm. So that's a, you know, that's a mini research project for the voter to, at least for the engaged voter, right? If you really want to take advantage of your rankings, you're going to have 6 rankings. So if you really want to take advantage of that, it's going to take some time and some effort for the voter. And we wanted to try and help that process. So that's why we started, in addition to our newsletter and our news coverage, we have a website at rosecityreform.org that has neutral candidate profiles for all city candidates. And we list their endorsements, we track their fundraising, we list you know, media links for including lots of your stories, Shane. You know, what we're really trying to do is be part of the process and helping the voter make an informed decision.
And I know you're talking a bit about sort of what's going on at Rose City Reform now. And to our listeners, I know Maja had already mentioned the website. It's rosecityreform.org. Maja also has a Substack where you can sign up for the newsletter. And the Substack also provides sort of daily news coverage and roundups of some of the interesting developments that are going on in these many different city races, primarily the mayor's races. You're focusing a bit on that. And then obviously the city council contests, which we now have, I believe at the most recent count and hopefully final count, what are we at? 97 candidates running for Portland City Council?
That's what I'm counting. And I actually have a call into the city today. Is this it? Is this the final list? Or are we going to see names trailing in throughout the day? But yeah, so far we seem to be looking at 97 candidates for city council.
Yeah. And so you have, within maybe the last year or so, pivoted more toward just trying to pull together all of the information that could be, helpful for voters and Portlanders as they begin to think about the decision-making process with an election of historic proportions, size, and consequence. But before that, and how I got into your project was the way in which you were also tracking and charting the discussion and the debate around at what were at the time proposed changes, reforms to the city's charter. Essentially, its government structure and the way in which we elect members to the council and mayor's office. I wanted to hear a little bit about why you found this process, this discussion, to be such an important one and an interesting one to you, that you were going to spend a lot of your time studying it, working on it, and sharing what you learned with other folks.
Yeah, so there are really two reasons. The first reason is just the general sort of consensus at the time when the Charter Commission started its work was that some pretty big changes was going to come out of that process. So I think we were everybody who followed that process, was expecting that. And so I was following that process, and then pretty closely. And early on in the process, this was really early in the sort of foundational discussions, it became clear that the Charter Commission was not just looking at small changes, not just looking at changing the form of government. Like, this was going to be a massive overhaul. And so I became very interested in that, and I wanted to share as much as possible as I could with others about that process. And the other reason is, and as I'm sure as a journalist, is that when you're pitching a story as a journalist, or you're to where you should focus your efforts, a lot of the time it's not on the public process that leads up to a big decision. Like, journalism tends to have like an angle, like the vote of a big decision, or they're discussing this really big change, right? There has to be a bit of an angle, and a lot of the time that coverage happens really late in the process, when citizen and public input is not as effective anymore, because most of the decisions have been made. So I wanted to start a newsletter when we were still pretty early in the process, and inform about what decisions were being made, so that if there were Portlanders that wanted to weigh in, they could do that while the process was still underway.
No, I recall, gosh, it's been maybe 2 years now already. So September of 2022, when I was writing one of my first big stories about the proposed charter changes. And I think I recall, having a line in there that just sort of, the mechanics of city government is not a particularly sexy or exciting topic. And yet it is such an extremely consequential one. And obviously, given the outcome of the vote in 2022 and the changes that we're undergoing and experiencing right now, I mean, this is massive, transformative stuff that's going on. I'm curious, during that debate and discussion around these charter changes in 2022, what were the aspects of the proposals that you found sort of most interesting or that really captured your attention and imagination?
I think what was most interesting to me was the fact that everything that was being discussed on the Portland level ties really to a national reform movement. I think that gets lost a lot of the time, and when we talk about Portland, because naturally we're focused on our own microcosm, but there is a rather large and pretty significant reform movement in the United States that's focused on a number of sort of democracy reform efforts, and they range from ranked choice voting, which we will soon have in Portland, to changing the way that representation works, to having districts with multiple seats, which is another thing that we will have in Portland. So, I'd already been following this pretty closely on the national level, and it became clear early that if Portland passed this reform package, which we did, we would sort of place ourselves at the forefront of the national democracy reform movement. And that's where we are right now. And I think it's important for Portlanders to know that there's a lot of national attention on Portland. A lot of people are really interested in how this system works out in Portland. There are many reformers on the national level that advocate for a similar system in Congress to sort of get at some of the things that ail us as a nation, like polarization or things like that. Whether you agree with that or not, it's important to understand that Portland means something even to people who don't live in Portland. A lot of people are watching.
And when this episode of Beat Check airs, there will be less than 60 days until the November 5th election. So essentially, it's after Labor Day now. We're really in the home stretch of our local races and obviously national ones as well. But I wanted to ask you, Maja, what are you paying close attention to now that we're kind of in this critical period for the city council mayor's races?
Well, I'll be paying attention to all the things. Right? There's so many things that are interesting about this election. But I guess one thing I'll say is there has been a pretty persistent chaos narrative surrounding this election. Because there are so many candidates, I think both from media and for the voters, there's just kind of this sense of how do we make sense of it all? How can we be expected to evaluate all of these candidates? What do they stand for? They all seem to care about the same things, like public safety and homelessness. Like, how do we do this? And I get that a lot from Rose City Reform subscribers. But I think if you look closely at the candidates that are running, you start to sort of unpack who is seeking office in this election. You start to see some pretty clear lines. Like there are pretty clear ideological lines forming between candidates, and there are also geographic lines as the districts kind of identify the issues that are most important to the constituents within those districts. So I think what will be interesting for me is to see, how how well will the candidates be able to communicate those differences, and how will political interest groups lean into that process and sort of help define, like, what do the candidates stand for, and ultimately what will the voters choose? Which direction do they want to go? Are we going to see a council that's split down the middle on how we handle public safety, homelessness, affordability, things like that? Or, are we going to have, or is there going to be like a clear mandate on how we should address these really big issues?
And I know that many Portlanders and likely voters in this election are just now beginning to tune into the local races here in Portland. And at least in my experience, and this is doing my reporting, talking to people around the city, talking to candidates running for office, and fielding actually quite a few emails from folks who read our work and are interested to learn more. It seems clear to me that as of right now, that a lot of voters just feel a little overwhelmed at the moment. I get asked all the time, and I'm not in a position to provide the advice that they're looking for, but like, who should I be paying attention to? What candidate should I be looking for? Looking into who are the serious contenders, et cetera, et cetera. I'm wondering, do you get asked those questions as well? And if so, what are the recommendations that you have for how people can really start to get a better handle on these very large candidate pools in their districts?
Yeah, I mean, I think my recommendations are, first of all, do not throw away your voter's pamphlet. You are really going to need it in this. This is like, if you usually throw it away, don't do it in this one, because as I said, some districts are going to have 30 candidates, and you're gonna, if you're going to use your rankings, you're going to need some supplemental information. We try to provide a similar service on our website, where you can sort candidates by multiple filters. So you can, for instance, sort by fundraising or by endorsement from certain groups. You can sort by pledges that candidates have made. And, the reason we have, for instance, fundraising on there is not, that you should, just check who has raised the most money and then just vote for those people. That's not the intention at all. But what you're able to do is you're able to go and look. And if you click at, the lowest category of I think it's a 0 to 1,000, you'll see that a lot of those candidates are candidates that don't have a website, or they don't have a picture of them, and they don't have a platform, they don't have a campaign right now. So, maybe wait to see if those candidates will sort of enter the race seriously and have eventually have a platform. But if you start to look at endorsements, most candidates who are running serious campaigns at this point have some level of endorsements. They have raised some money. A lot of them have qualified for public campaign financing. And you can also, there are also some cues that you can use in terms of trying to separate out ideological lines. For instance, most of the pledges in this election cycle are pretty progressive pledges. So, for instance, if you go to our website and you look at our candidate tracker, you will see that the pledges that candidates make are typically, a Green New Deal, or Save Portland street response, or there are some anti-endorsement pledges, like, not accepting police money. Police money, not accepting police money means like not taking money from police associations or unions, or not accepting fossil fuel money. You're able to kind of form a more of a picture of where the candidate stands on a lot of issues, by looking at their endorsements, their pledges, and to some extent their fundraising as well.
And I think the last thing that I wanted to chat with you briefly about today, Maja, was the recent report that Rose City Reform published, where you all did a real deep dive analysis of the candidates running for city council and mayor, and just trying to and attempting to sort of identify, sort of demographic information collectively and sort of other trends and insights. And I would encourage listeners, when you check out Rose City Reform, to also check out this State of the Race report that they recently put out. But, what were some of the findings that really stood out to you, or that you'd like to highlight right now that are noteworthy in your opinion?
In terms of demographics, I think there were some interesting findings in our report. And one finding that was, I guess objectively pretty disappointing, was the underrepresentation of women in the candidate pool. And the intent of these reforms really, to a large extent, comes down to more diversity of representation. And so I think for a lot of candidates, for a lot of voters, it's disappointing that in the mayoral candidate pool, we have less than 25% of the candidates are women, and in the council candidate pool, less than a third. But that said, women are really punching above their weight in this election. So, for instance, the top fundraiser in each district, except for District 2, is a woman. And in District 2, where Dan Ryan is the top fundraiser, he is closely trailed by women. And so I think that's really interesting to see how, sometimes the candidate pool looks a certain way, but then the way the front runners position themselves, it shakes out a slightly different way. Another thing that I think is interesting to point out is the council candidate pool pretty closely mirrors the racial ethnic makeup of Portland's population. So in Portland, about 72% of the population is white, and in the council candidate pool, it's about 69%. And that means there's about a third of the candidate pool that identifies as either BIPOC or two or more races. And a big selling point and intent of the charter reform package was to allow Portlanders of color to elect representation that was proportionate to their share of the population. So right now we're really looking at a candidate pool that closely mirrors that intent. So I think it will be really interesting to see if that will hold, and candidates of color will represent, a third or more of the council, and if so, I think it will be considered a pretty significant win for the reforms by reform advocates.
And I know, as you continue to sort of track every aspect of these elections in real great detail, I am wondering if there is, anything else, one or two other things that you're going to be paying particularly close attention to in these last 8 or 9 weeks before the election.
I think everybody's probably going to be paying attention to the role of political interest groups in this election. We don't just have an unprecedented number of candidates running, but we also have I think what can be called an unprecedented level of political organizing going on, given the opportunity of a clean slate at City Hall and the opportunity for a lot of different interest groups to get a seat at the table and help shape the future of Portland. So I think that's going to be really interesting to see. We know that labor is organizing, we know business is organizing, we know housing advocates are organizing, BIPOC groups are organizing, social justice groups are organizing. There's just a tremendous amount of activity going on, and it will be really interesting to see how that shapes this election going forward.
Maja Harris, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to Beat Check with the Oregonian. If you like this show, give us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps people find the show, and tell a friend. Help spread the word. The best way to support our journalism and stories like this one is with a subscription to the Oregonian Oregon Live. You can do that at OregonLive.com/pod support. Until next time.